The Man in the Brown Suit by Agatha Christie. Chapter 19. It reminded me forcibly of episode 3 in The Perils of Pamela. How often had I not sat in the sixpenny seats, eating a twopenny bar of milk chocolate, and yearning for similar things to happen to me? Well, they had happened with a vengeance. And somehow it was not nearly so amusing as I had imagined. It's all very well on the screen. You have the comfortable knowledge that there's bound to be an episode 4. But in real life, there was absolutely no guarantee that Anna the adventuress might not terminate abruptly at the end of any episode. Yes, I was in a tight place. All the things that Rayburn had said that morning came back to me with unpleasant distinctness. Tell the truth, he had said. Well, I could always do that, but was it going to help me? To begin with, would my story be believed? Would they consider it likely or possible that I had started off on this mad escapade simply on the strength of a scrap of paper smelling of mothballs? It sounded to me a wildly incredible tale. In that moment of cold sanity, I cursed myself for a melodramatic idiot and yearned for the peaceful boredom of Little Hampsley. All this passed through my mind in less time than it takes to tell. My first instinctive movement was to step backwards and feel for the handle of the door. My captor merely grinned. Here you are and here you stay, he remarked facetiously. I did my best to put a bold face upon the matter. I was invited to come here by the curator of the Cape Town Museum. If I have made a mistake. A mistake? Oh, yes, a big mistake. He laughed coarsely. What right have you to detain me? I shall inform the police. Yap, 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 like a little toy dog. He laughed. I sat down on a chair. I can only conclude that you are a dangerous lunatic, I said coldly. Indeed. I should like to point out to you that my friends are perfectly well aware where I have gone, and that if I have not returned by this evening, they will come in search of me. You understand? So your friends know where you are, do they? Which of them? Thus challenged, I did a lightning calculation of chances. Should I mention Sir Eustace? He was a well-known man, and his name might carry weight. But if they were in touch with Paget, they might know I was lying. Better not risk Sir Eustace. Mrs. Blair, for one, I said lightly. A friend of mine with whom I am staying. I think not, said my captor, slyly shaking his orange head. You have not seen her since 11 this morning. And you received a note, bidding you come here, at lunchtime. His words showed me how closely my movements had been followed, but I was not going to give in without a fight. You are very clever, I said. Perhaps you have heard of that useful invention, the telephone? Mrs. Blair called me up on it when I was resting in my room after lunch. I told her then where I was going this afternoon. To my great satisfaction, I saw a shade of uneasiness pass over his face. Clearly, he had overlooked the possibility that Suzanne might have telephoned to me. I wished she really had done so. Enough of this, he said harshly, rising. What are you going to do with me? I asked, still endeavoring to appear composed. Put you where you can do no harm in case your friends come after you. For a moment my blood ran cold, but his next words reassured me. Tomorrow you'll have some questions to answer, and after you've answered them we shall know what to do with you. And I can tell you, young lady, we've more ways than one of making obstinate little fools talk. It was not cheering, but it was at least a respite. I had until tomorrow. This man was clearly an underling obeying the orders of a superior. Could that superior by any chance be Paget? he called, and two Kafirs appeared. I was taken upstairs. Despite my struggles, I was gagged and then bound hand and foot. The room into which they had taken me was a kind of attic right under the roof. It was dusty and showed little signs of having been occupied. The Dutchman made a mock bow and withdrew, closing the door behind him. I was quite helpless. Turn and twist as I would, I could not loosen my hands in the slightest degree, and the gag prevented me from crying out. If, by any possible chance, anyone did come to the house, I could do nothing to attract their attention. Down below, I heard the sound of a door shutting. Evidently, the Dutchman was going out. It was maddening not to be able to do anything. I strained again at my bonds, but the knots held. I desisted at last, and either fainted or fell asleep. When I awoke, I was in pain all over. It was quite dark now, and I judged that the night must be well advanced, for the moon was high in the heavens and shining down through the dusty skylight. The gag was half choking me, and the stiffness and pain were unendurable. It was then that my eyes fell on a bit of broken glass lying in the corner. A moonbeam slanted right down on it, and its glistening had caught my attention. As I looked at it, an idea came into my head. My arms and legs were helpless, but surely I could still roll. Slowly and awkwardly, I set myself in motion. It was not easy. Besides being extremely painful, since I could not guard my face with my arms, it was also exceedingly difficult to keep any particular direction. I tended to roll in every direction except the one I wanted to go. In the end, however, I came right up against my objective. It almost touched my bound hands. Even then, it was not easy. It took an infinity of time before I could wriggle the glass into such a position, wedged against the wall, that it would rub up and down on my bonds. It was a long, heart-rending process, and I almost despaired, but in the end I succeeded in sawing through the cords that bound my wrists. The rest was a matter of time. Once I had restored the circulation to my hands by rubbing the wrists vigorously, I was able to undo the gag. 1 or 2 full breaths did a lot for me. Very soon I had undone the last knot, though even then it was some time before I could stand on my feet, but at last I stood erect, swinging my arms to and fro to restore the circulation, and wishing above all things that I could get hold of something to eat. I waited about a quarter of an hour, to be quite sure of my recovered strength. Then I tiptoed noiselessly to the door. As I had hoped, it was not locked, only latched. I unlatched it and peeped cautiously out. Everything was still. The moonlight came in through a window and showed me the dusty, uncarpeted staircase. Cautiously, I crept down it. Still no sound, but as I stood on the landing below, a faint murmur of voices reached me. I stopped dead and stood there for some time. A clock on the wall registered the fact that it was after midnight. I was fully aware of the risks I might run if I descended lower, but my curiosity was too much for me. With infinite precautions, I prepared to explore. I crept softly down the last flight of stairs and stood in the square hall. I looked round me, and then caught my breath with a gasp. A Kafir boy was sitting by the hall door. He had not seen me. Indeed, I soon realized by his breathing that he was fast asleep. Should I retreat, or should I go on? The voices came from the room I had been shown into on arrival. One of them was that of my Dutch friend, the other I could not for the moment recognize, though it seemed vaguely familiar. In the end, I decided that it was clearly my duty to hear all I could. I must risk the Kafir boy waking up. I crossed the hall noiselessly and knelt by the study door. For a moment or two I could hear no better. The voices were louder, but I could not distinguish what they said. I applied my eye to the keyhole instead of my ear. As I had guessed, one of the speakers was the big Dutchman. The other man was sitting outside my circumscribed range of vision. Suddenly he rose to get himself a drink. His back, black clad and decorous, came into view. Even before he turned round, I knew who he was. Mr. Chichester. Now I began to make out the words. All the same, it is dangerous. Suppose her friends come after her. It was the big man speaking. Chichester answered him. He had dropped his clerical voice entirely. No wonder I had not recognized it. All bluff. They haven't an idea where she is. She spoke very positively. I dare say. I've looked into the matter, and we've nothing to fear. Anyway, it's the colonel's orders. You don't want to go against them, I suppose? The Dutchman ejaculated something in his own language. I judged it to be a hasty disclaimer. But why not knock her on the head? He growled. It would be simple. The boat is all ready. She could be taken out to sea. Yes, said Chichester meditatively. That is what I should do. She knows too much, that is certain. But the colonel is a man who likes to play a lone hand, though no one else must do so. Something in his own words seemed to awaken a memory that annoyed him. He wants information of some kind from this girl. He had paused before the information, and the Dutchman was quick to catch him up. Information? Something of the kind. Diamonds, I said to myself. And now, continued Chichester, give me the lists. For a long time their conversation was quite incomprehensible to me. It seemed to deal with large quantities of vegetables. Dates were mentioned, prices, and various names of places which I did not know. It was quite half an hour before they had finished their checking and counting. Good, said Chichester, and there was a sound as though he pushed back his chair. I will take these with me for the colonel to see. When do you leave? 10 o'clock tomorrow morning will do. Do you want to see the girl before you go? No. There are strict orders that no one is to see her until the colonel comes. Is she all right? I looked in on her when I came in for dinner. She was asleep, I think. What about food? A little starvation will do no harm. The colonel will be here some time tomorrow. She will answer questions better if she is hungry. No one had better go near her till then. Is she securely tied up? The Dutchman laughed. What do you think? They both laughed. So did I, under my breath. Then, as the sounds seemed to betoken that they were about to come out of the room, I beat a hasty retreat. I was just in time. As I reached the head of the stairs, I heard the door of the room open, and at the same time the carpet stirred and moved. My retreat by the way of the hall door was not to be thought of. I retired prudently to the attic, gathered my bonds round me, and lay down again on the floor, in case they should take it into their heads to come and look at me. They did not do so, however. After about an hour, I crept down the stairs, but the Kafir by the door was awake and humming softly to himself. I was anxious to get out of the house, but I did not quite see how to manage it. In the end, I was forced to retreat to the attic again. The Kafir was clearly on guard for the night. I remained there patiently all through the sounds of early morning preparation. The men breakfasted in the hall. I could hear their voices distinctly floating up the stairs. I was getting thoroughly unnerved. How on earth was I to get out of the house? I counseled myself to be patient. A rash move might spoil everything. After breakfast came the sounds of Chichester departing. To my intense relief, the Dutchman accompanied him. I waited breathlessly. Breakfast was being cleared away, the work of the house was being done. At last, the various activities seemed to die down. I slipped out from my lair once more. Very carefully, I crept down the stairs. The hall was empty. Like a flash, I was across it, had unlatched the door, and was outside in the sunshine. I ran down the drive like one possessed. Once outside, I resumed a normal walk. People stared at me curiously, and I do not wonder. My face and clothes must have been covered in dust from rolling about in the attic. At last, I came to a garage. I went in. I have met with an accident, I explained. I want a car to take me to Cape Town at once. I must catch the boat to Durban. I had not long to wait. 10 minutes later, I was speeding along in the direction of Cape Town. I must know if Chichester was on the boat. Whether to sail on her myself or not, I could not determine, but in the end I decided to do so. Chichester would not know that I had seen him in the villa at Musenberg. He would doubtless lay further traps for me, but I was forewarned. And he was the man I was after, the man who was seeking the diamonds on behalf of the mysterious Colonel. Alas, for my plans! As I arrived at the docks, the Kilmorden castle was steaming out to sea. And I had no means of knowing whether Chichester had sailed on her or not. Chapter 20. I drove to the hotel. There was no one in the lounge that I knew. I ran upstairs and tapped on Suzanne's door. Her voice bade me come in. When she saw who it was, she literally fell on my neck. Anne, dear, where have you been? I've been worried to death about you. What have you been doing? Having adventures, I replied. Episode 3 of The Perils of Pamela. I told her the whole story. She gave vent to a deep sigh when I finished. Why do these things always happen to you? She demanded plaintively. Why does no one gag me and bind me hand and foot? You wouldn't like it if they did, I assured her. To tell you the truth, I'm not nearly so keen on having adventures myself as I was. A little of that sort of thing goes a long way. Suzanne seemed unconvinced. An hour or two of gagging and binding would have changed her views quickly enough. Suzanne likes thrills, but she hates being uncomfortable. And what are we all doing now? She asked. I don't quite know, I said thoughtfully. You still go to Rhodesia, of course, to keep an eye on Paget. And you? That was just my difficulty. Had Chichester gone on the Kilmorden, or had he not? Did he mean to carry out his original plan of going to Durban? The hour of his leaving Musenberg seemed to point to an affirmative answer to both questions. In that case, I might go to Durban by train. I fancied that I should get there before the boat. On the other hand, if the news of my escape were wired to Chichester, and also the information that I had left Cape Town for Durban, nothing was simpler for him than to leave the boat at either Port Elizabeth or East London and so give me the slip completely. It was rather a knotty problem. We'll inquire about trains to Durban anyway, I said. And it's not too late for morning tea, said Suzanne. We'll have it in the lounge. The Durban train left at 8:15 that evening, so they told me at the office. For the moment, I postponed decision and joined Suzanne for somewhat belated 11 o'clock tea. Do you feel that you would really recognize Chichester again? In any other disguise, I mean? Asked Suzanne. I shook my head ruefully. I certainly didn't recognize him as the stewardess, and never should have but for your drawing. The man's a professional actor, I'm sure of it, said Suzanne thoughtfully. His makeup is perfectly marvelous. He might come off the boat as a navy or something, and you'd never spot him. You're very cheering, I said. At that minute, Colonel Ray stepped in through the window and came and joined us. What is Sir Eustace doing? Asked Suzanne. I haven't seen him about today. Rather an odd expression passed over the Colonel's face. He's got a little trouble of his own to attend to which is keeping him busy. Tell us about it. I mustn't tell tales out of school. Tell us something, even if you have to invent it for our special benefit. Well, what would you say to the famous man in the brown suit having made the voyage with us? What? I felt the color die out of my face and then surge back again. Fortunately, Colonel Reyes was not looking at me. It's a fact, I believe. Every port watched for him, and he bamboozled Pedler into bringing him out as his secretary. Not Mr. Paget. Oh, not Paget, the other fellow. Rayburn, he called himself. Have they arrested him? Asked Suzanne. Under the table, she gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. I waited breathlessly for an answer. He seems to have disappeared into thin air. How does Sir Eustace take it? Regards it as a personal insult offered him by fate. An opportunity of hearing Sir Eustace's views on the matter presented itself later in the day. We were awakened from a refreshing afternoon nap by a page boy with a note. In touching terms, it requested the pleasure of our company at tea in his sitting room. The poor man was indeed in a pitiable state. He poured out his troubles to us, encouraged by Suzanne's sympathetic murmurs. She does that sort of thing very well. First, a perfectly strange woman has the impertinence to get herself murdered in my house, on purpose to annoy me, I do believe. Why my house? Why, of all the houses in Great Britain, choose the Mill House? What harm had I ever done the woman that she must needs get herself murdered there? Suzanne made one of her sympathetic noises again, and Sir Eustace proceeded in a still more aggrieved tone. And, if that's not enough, the fellow who murdered her has the impudence, the colossal impudence, to attach himself to me as my secretary. My secretary, if you please. I'm tired of secretaries. I won't have any more secretaries. Either they're concealed murderers or else they're drunken brawlers. Have you seen Paget's black eye? But of course you have. How can I go about with a secretary like that? And his face is such a nasty shade of yellow too, just the color that doesn't go with a black eye. I've done with secretaries unless I have a girl. A nice girl with liquid eyes who will hold my hand when I'm feeling cross. What about you, Miss Anne? Will you take on the job? How often shall I have to hold your hand? I asked, laughing. All day long, replied Sir Eustace gallantly. I shan't get much typing done at that rate, I reminded him. That doesn't matter. All this work is Paget's idea. He works me to death. I'm looking forward to leaving him behind in Cape Town. He is staying behind? Yes, he'll enjoy himself thoroughly sleuthing about after Rayburn. That's the sort of thing suits Paget down to the ground. He adores intrigue. But I'm quite serious in my offer. Will you come? Mrs. Blair here is a competent chaperone, and you can have a half holiday every now and again to dig for bones. Thank you very much, Sir Eustace, I said cautiously, but I think I'm leaving for Durban tonight. Now don't be an obstinate girl. Remember, there are lots of lions in Rhodesia. You like lions. All girls do. Will they be practicing low jumps? I asked, laughing. No, thank you very much, but I must go to Durban. Sir Eustace looked at me, sighed deeply, then opened the door of the adjoining room and called to Paget. If you've quite finished your afternoon sleep, my dear fellow, perhaps you'd do a little work for change. Guy Paget appeared in the doorway. He bowed to us both, starting slightly at the sight of me, and replied in a melancholy voice, I have been typing that memorandum all this afternoon, Sir Eustace. Well, stop typing it then. Go down to the Trade Commissioner's office, or the Board of Agriculture, or the Chamber of Mines, or one of these places, and ask them to lend me some kind of a woman to take to Rhodesia. She must have liquid eyes and not object to my holding her hand. Yes, Sir Eustace. I will ask for a competent shorthand typist. Paget's a malicious fellow, said Sir Eustace after the secretary had departed. I'd be prepared to bet that he'll pick out some slap-faced creature on purpose to annoy me. She must have nice feet too. I forgot to mention that. I clutched Suzanne excitedly by the hand and almost dragged her along to her room. Now, Suzanne, I said, we've got to make plans and make them quickly. Paget is staying behind here. You heard that? Yes. I suppose that means that I shan't be allowed to go to Rhodesia, which is very annoying because I want to go to Rhodesia. How tiresome. Cheer up, I said. You're going all right. I don't see how you could back out at the last moment without its appearing frightfully suspicious. And, besides, Paget might suddenly be summoned by Sir Eustace, and it would be far harder for you to attach yourself to him for the journey up. It would hardly be respectable, said Suzanne, dimpling. I should have to pretend a fatal passion for him as an excuse. On the other hand, if you were there when he arrived, it would all be perfectly simple and natural. Besides, I don't think we ought to lose sight of the other two entirely. Oh, and you surely can't suspect Colonel Reyes or Sir Eustace. I suspect everybody, I said darkly, and if you've read any detective stories, Suzanne, you must know that it's always the most unlikely person who's the villain. Lots of criminals have been cheerful fat men like Sir Eustace. Colonel Reyes isn't particularly fat, or particularly cheerful either. Sometimes they're lean and saturnine, I retorted. I don't say I seriously suspect either of them, but, after all, the woman was murdered in Sir Eustace's house. Yes, we needn't go over all that again. I'll watch him for you, and if he gets any fatter and any more cheerful, I'll send you a telegram at once. Sir E. swelling. Highly suspicious. Come at once. Really, Suzanne, I cried, you seem to think all this is a game. I know I do, said Suzanne, unabashed. It seems like that. It's your fault, and I've got imbued with your let's have an adventure spirit. It doesn't seem a bit real. Dear me, if Clarence knew that I was running about Africa tracking dangerous criminals, he'd have a fit. Why don't you cable him about it? I asked sarcastically. Suzanne's sense of humor always fails her when it comes to sending cables. She considered my suggestion in perfectly good faith. I might. It would have to be a very long one. Her eyes brightened at the thought. But I think it's better not. Husbands always want to interfere with perfectly harmless amusements. Well, I said, summing up the situation, you will keep an eye on Sir Eustace and Colonel Reyes. I know why I've got to watch Sir Eustace, interrupted Suzanne, because of his figure and his humorous conversation. But I think it's carrying it rather far to suspect Colonel Reyes, I do indeed. Why, he's something to do with the Secret Service. Do you know, Anne, I believe the best thing we could do would be to confide in him and tell him the whole story. I objected vigorously to this unsporting proposal. I recognized in it the disastrous effects of matrimony. How often have I not heard a perfectly intelligent female say, in the tone of one clinching an argument, Edgar says, and all the time you are perfectly aware that Edgar is a perfect fool. Suzanne, by reason of her married state, was yearning to lean upon some man or other. However, she promised faithfully that she would not breathe a word to Colonel Reyes, and we went on with our plan making. It's quite clear that I must stay here and watch Paget, and this is the best way to do it. I must pretend to leave for Durban this evening, take my luggage down, and so on, but really I shall go to some small hotel in the town. I can alter my appearance a little, wear a fair toupee and one of those thick white lace veils, and I shall have a much better chance of seeing what he's really at if he thinks I'm safely out of the way. Suzanne approved this plan heartily. We made due and ostentatious preparations, inquiring once more about the departure of the train at the office and packing my luggage. We dined together in the restaurant. Colonel Reyes did not appear, but Sir Eustace and Paget were at their table in the window. Paget left the table halfway through the meal, which annoyed me, as I had planned to say goodbye to him. However, doubtless Sir Eustace would do as well. I went over to him when I had finished. Goodbye, Sir Eustace, I said. I'm off tonight to Durban. Sir Eustace sighed heavily. So I heard. You wouldn't like me to come with you, would you? I should love it. Nice girl. Sure you won't change your mind and come and look for lions in Rhodesia? Quite sure. He must be a very handsome fellow, said Sir Eustace plaintively. Some young whippersnapper in Durban, I suppose, who puts my mature charms completely in the shade. By the way, Paget's going down in the car in a minute or two. He could take you to the station. Oh, no, thank you, I said hastily. Mrs. Blair and I have got our own taxi ordered. To go down with Guy Paget was the last thing I wanted. Sir Eustace looked at me attentively. I don't believe you like Paget. I don't blame you. Of all the officious, indifferent asses, going about with the air of a martyr, and doing everything he can to annoy and upset me. What has he done now? I inquired with some curiosity. He's got hold of a secretary for me. You never saw such a woman. 40, if she's a day, wears pince-nez and sensible boots and an air of brisk efficiency that will be the death of me. A regular slap-faced woman. Won't she hold your hand? I devotedly hope not, exclaimed Sir Eustace. That would be the last straw. Well, goodbye, liquid eyes. If I shoot a lion, I shan't give you the skin, after the base way you've deserted me. He squeezed my hand warmly and we parted. Suzanne was waiting for me in the hall. She was to come down to see me off. Let's start at once, I said hastily, and motioned to the man to get a taxi. Then a voice behind me made me start. Excuse me, Miss Bedingfeld, but I'm just going down in a car. I can drop you and Mrs. Blair at the station. Oh, thank you, I said hastily. But there's no need to trouble you. No trouble at all, I assure you. Put the luggage in, porter. I was helpless. I might have protested further, but a slight warning nudge from Suzanne urged me to be on my guard. Thank you, Mr. Paget, I said coldly. We all got into the car. As we raced down the road into the town, I racked my brains for something to say. In the end, Paget himself broke the silence. I have secured a very capable secretary for Sir Eustace, he observed. Miss Pettigrew. He wasn't exactly raving about her just now, I remarked. Paget looked at me coldly. She is a proficient shorthand typist, he said repressively. We pulled up in front of the station. Here surely he would leave us. I turned with outstretched hand, but no. I'll come and see you off. It's just 8 o'clock. Your train goes in a quarter of an hour. He gave efficient directions to porters. I stood helpless, not daring to look at Suzanne. The man suspected. He was determined to make sure that I did go by the train. And what could I do? Nothing. I saw myself, in a quarter of an hour's time, steaming out of the station with Paget planted on the platform waving me adieu. He had turned the tables on me adroitly. His manner towards me had changed, moreover. It was full of an uneasy geniality which settled upon him and which nauseated me. The man was an oily hypocrite. First he tried to murder me, and now he paid me compliments. Did he imagine for 1 minute that I hadn't recognized him that night on the boat? No, it was a pose which he forced me to acquiesce in, his tongue in his cheek all the while. Helpless as a sheep, I moved along under his expert directions. My luggage was piled in my sleeping compartment. I had a two-berth one to myself. It was 12 minutes past 8. In 3 minutes the train would start. But Paget had reckoned without Suzanne. It will be a terribly hot journey, and, she said suddenly, especially going through the Karoo tomorrow. You've got some eau de cologne or lavender water with you, haven't you? My cue was plain. Oh, dear, I cried. I left my eau de cologne on the dressing table at the hotel. Suzanne's habit of command served her well. She turned imperiously to Paget. Mr. Paget. Quick. You've just time. There's a chemist almost opposite the station. And must have some eau de cologne. He hesitated, but Suzanne's imperative manner was too much for him. She is a born autocrat. He went. Suzanne followed him with her eyes till he disappeared. Quick, and get out the other side, in case he hasn't really gone, but is watching us from the end of the platform. Never mind your luggage. You can telegraph about that tomorrow. Oh, if only the train starts on time. I opened the gate on the opposite side to the platform and climbed down. Nobody was observing me. I could just see Suzanne standing where I had left her, looking up at the train and apparently chatting to me at the window. A whistle blew, the train began to draw out. Then I heard feet racing furiously up the platform. I withdrew to the shadow of a friendly bookstall and watched. Suzanne turned from waving her handkerchief to the retreating train. Too late, Mr. Paget, she said cheerfully. She's gone. Is that the eau de cologne? What a pity we didn't think of it sooner. They passed not far from me on their way out of the station. Guy Paget was extremely hot. He had evidently run all the way to the chemist and back. Shall I get you a taxi, Mrs. Blair? Suzanne did not fail in her role. Yes, please. Can't I give you a lift back? Have you much to do for Sir Eustace? Dear me, I wish Anne Bedingfeld was coming with us tomorrow. I don't like the idea of a young girl like that travelling off to Durban all by herself. But she was set upon it. Some little attraction there, I fancy. They passed out of earshot. Clever Suzanne. She had saved me. I allowed a minute or two to elapse, and then I too made my way out of the station, almost colliding as I did so with a man, an unpleasant-looking man with a nose disproportionately big for his face. Chapter 21. I had no further difficulty in carrying out my plans. I found a small hotel in a back street, got a room there, paid a deposit as I had no luggage with me and went placidly to bed. On the following morning, I was up early and went out into the town to purchase a modest wardrobe. My idea was to do nothing until after the departure of the 11 o'clock train to Rhodesia with most of the party on board. Paget was not likely to indulge in any nefarious activities until he had got rid of them. Accordingly, I took a tram out of the town and proceeded to enjoy a country walk. It was comparatively cool, and I was glad to stretch my legs after the long voyage and my close confinement at Musenberg. A lot hinges on small things. My shoelace came untied, and I stopped to do it up. The road had just turned a corner, and as I was bending over the offending shoe, a man came right round and almost walked into me. He lifted his hat, murmuring an apology, and went on. It struck me at the time that his face was vaguely familiar, but at the moment I thought no more of it. I looked at my wristwatch. The time was getting on. I turned my feet in the direction of Cape Town. There was a tram on the point of going, and I had to run for it. I heard other footsteps running behind me. I swung myself on, and so did the other runner. I recognized him at once. It was the man who had passed me on the road when my shoe came untied, and in a flash I knew why his face was familiar. It was the small man with the big nose whom I had run into on leaving the station the night before. The coincidence was rather startling. Could it be possible that the man was deliberately following me? I resolved to test that as promptly as possible. I rang the bell and got off at the next stop. The man did not get off. I withdrew into the shadow of a shop doorway and watched. He alighted at the next stop and walked back in my direction. The case was clear enough. I was being followed. I had crowed too soon. My victory over Guy Paget took on another aspect. I hailed the next tram and, as I expected, my shadow also got on. I gave myself up to some very serious thinking. It was perfectly apparent that I had stumbled on a bigger thing than I knew. The murder in the house at Marlow was not an isolated incident committed by a solitary individual. I was up against a gang, and, thanks to Colonel Race's revelations to Suzanne, and what I had overheard at the house at Musenberg, I was beginning to understand some of its manifold activities. Systematized crime, organized by the man known to his followers as the Colonel. I remembered some of the talk I had heard on board ship, of the strike on the Rand and the causes underlying it, and the belief that some secret organization was at work fomenting the agitation. That was the Colonel's work. His emissaries were acting according to plan. He took no part in these things himself, I had always heard, as he limited himself to directing and organizing. The brain work, not the dangerous labor, for him. But still it well might be that he himself was on the spot, directing affairs from an apparently impeccable position. That, then, was the meaning of Colonel Race's presence on the Kilmorden Castle. He was out after the arch-criminal. Everything fitted in with that assumption. He was someone high up in the Secret Service whose business it was to lay the Colonel by the heels. I nodded to myself. Things were becoming very clear to me. What of my part in the affair? Where did I come in? Was it only diamonds they were after? I shook my head. Great as the value of the diamonds might be, they hardly accounted for the desperate attempts which had been made to get me out of the way. No, I stood for more than that. In some way, unknown to myself, I was a menace, a danger. Some knowledge that I had, or that they thought I had, made them anxious to remove me at all costs, and that knowledge was bound up somehow with the diamonds. There was one person, I felt sure, who could enlighten me, if he would. The man in the brown suit, Harry Rayburn. He knew the other half of the story. But he had vanished into the darkness. He was a hunted creature flying from pursuit. In all probability, he and I would never meet again. I brought myself back with a jerk to the actualities of the moment. It was no good thinking sentimentally of Harry Rayburn. He had displayed the greatest antipathy to me from the first. Or, at least, there I was again, dreaming. The real problem was what to do now. I, priding myself upon my role of watcher, had become the watched. And I was afraid. For the first time, I began to lose my nerve. I was the little bit of grit that was impeding the smooth working of the great machine, and I fancied that the machine would have a short way with little bits of grit. Once Harry Rayburn had saved me, once I had saved myself, but I felt suddenly that the odds were heavily against me. My enemies were all around me in every direction, and they were closing in. If I continued to play a lone hand, I was doomed. I rallied myself with an effort. After all, what could they do? I was in a civilized city, with policemen every few yards. I would be very in future. They should not trap me again as they had done in Musenberg. As I reached this point in my meditations, the train arrived at Adderley Street. I got out. Undecided what to do, I walked slowly up the left-hand side of the street. I did not trouble to look if my watcher was behind me. I knew he was. I walked into Cartwright's and ordered 2 coffee ice cream sodas to steady my nerves. A man, I suppose, would have had a stiff peg, but girls derive a lot of comfort from ice cream sodas. I applied myself to the end of the straw with gusto. The cool liquid went trickling down my throat in the most agreeable manner. I pushed the first glass aside empty. I was sitting on one of the little high stools in front of the counter. Out of the tail of my eye, I saw my tracker come in and sit down unostentatiously at a little table near the door. I finished the second coffee soda and demanded a maple one. I can drink practically an unlimited amount of ice cream sodas. Suddenly, the man by the door got up and went out. That surprised me. If he was going to wait outside, why not wait outside from the beginning? I slipped down from my stool and went cautiously to the door. I drew back quickly into the shadow. The man was talking to Guy Paget. If I had ever had any doubts, that would have settled it. Paget had his watch out and was looking at it. They exchanged a few brief words, and then the secretary swung on down the street towards the station. Evidently, he had given his orders. But what were they? Suddenly, my heart leapt into my mouth. The man who had followed me crossed to the middle of the road and spoke to a policeman. He spoke at some length, gesticulating towards Cartwright's and evidently explaining something. I saw the plan at once. I was to be arrested on some charge or other, pocket-picking, perhaps. It would be easy enough for the gang to put through a simple little matter like that. Of what good to protest my innocence? They would have seen to every detail. Long ago they had brought a charge of robbing De Beers against Harry Rayburn, and he had not been able to disprove it, though I had little doubt but that he had been absolutely blameless. What chance had I against such a frame-up as the colonel could devise? I glanced up at the clock almost mechanically, and immediately another aspect of the case struck me. I saw the point of Guy Paget's looking at his watch. It was just on 11, and at 11 the mail train left for Rhodesia, bearing with it the influential friends who might otherwise come to my rescue. That was the reason of my immunity up to now. From last night till 11 this morning I had been safe, but now the net was closing in upon me. I hurriedly opened my bag and paid for my drinks, and as I did so, my heart seemed to stand still, for inside it was a man's wallet stuffed with notes. It must have been deftly introduced into my handbag as I left the tram. Promptly, I lost my head. I hurried out of Cartwright's. The little man with the big nose and the policeman were just crossing the road. They saw me, and the little man designated me excitedly to the policeman. I took to my heels and ran. I judged him to be a slow policeman. I should get a start. But I had no plan, even then. I just ran for my life down Adderley Street. People began to stare. I felt that in another minute someone would stop me. An idea flashed into my head. The station? I asked in a breathless gasp. Just down on the right. I sped on. It is permissible to run for a train. I turned into the station, but as I did so, I heard footsteps close behind me. The little man with the big nose was a champion sprinter. I foresaw that I should be stopped before I got to the platform I was in search of. I looked up to the clock, 1 minute to 11. I might just do it if my plan succeeded. I had entered the station by the main entrance in Adderley Street. I now darted out again through the side exit. Directly opposite me was the side entrance to the post office, the main entrance to which is in Adderley Street. As I expected, my pursuer, instead of following me in, ran down the street to cut me off when I emerged by the main entrance, or to warn the policeman to do so. In an instant, I slipped across the street again and back into the station. I ran like a lunatic. It was just 11. The long train was moving as I appeared on the platform. A porter tried to stop me, but I wriggled myself out of his grasp and sprang upon the footboard. I mounted the 2 steps and opened the gate. I was safe. The train was gathering way. We passed a man standing by himself at the end of the platform. I waved to him. "Goodbye, Mr. Paget," I shouted. Never have I seen a man more taken aback. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. In a minute or two, I was having trouble with the conductor. But I took a lofty tone. "I am Sir Eustace Pedler's secretary," I said haughtily. "Please take me to his private car." Suzanne and Colonel Reyes were standing on the rear observation platform. They both uttered an exclamation of utter surprise at seeing me. "Hello, Miss Anne," cried Colonel Reyes. "Where have you turned up from? I thought you'd gone to Durban. What an unexpected person you are." Suzanne said nothing, but her eyes asked 100 questions. "I must report myself to my chief," I said demurely. "Where is he?" "He's in the office, middle compartment, dictating at an incredible rate to the unfortunate Miss Pettigrew." "This enthusiasm for work is something new," I commented. "HM," said Colonel Reyes. "His idea is, I think, to give her sufficient work to chain her to her typewriter in her own compartment for the rest of the day." I laughed. Then, followed by the other two, I sought out Sir Eustace. He was striding up and down the circumscribed space, hurling a flood of words at the unfortunate secretary whom I now saw for the first time. A tall, square woman in drab clothing, with pince-nez and an efficient air. I judged that she was finding it difficult to keep pace with Sir Eustace, for her pencil was flying along, and she was frowning horribly. I stepped into the compartment. "Come aboard, sir," I said saucily. Sir Eustace paused dead in the middle of a complicated sentence on the labor situation and stared at me. Miss Pettigrew must be a nervous creature, in spite of her efficient air, for she jumped as though she had been shot. "God bless my soul," ejaculated Sir Eustace. "What about the young man in Durban?" "I prefer you," I said softly. "Darling," said Sir Eustace. You can start holding my hand at once. Miss Pettigrew coughed, and Sir Eustace hastily withdrew his hand. Ah, yes, he said. Let me see, where were we? Yes. Tilman rose, in his speech at What's the matter? Why aren't you taking it down? I think, said Colonel Reyes gently, that Miss Pettigrew has broken her pencil. He took it from her and sharpened it. Sir Eustace stared, and so did I. There was something in Colonel Reyes's tone that I did not quite understand.